You're not going to Berkeley. We've decided to use your college fund to help your sister buy a house for her baby." Those words from my father's mouth shattered my world into 1,000 pieces. 18 years of being the responsible one, the studious one, the one who followed all the rules. And this was my reward? Watching my dreams dissolve so my irresponsible sister could have a nice nursery for her unplanned baby? I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Instead, I made a decision that night that would completely transform not just my life, but the lives of hundreds of struggling students who would come after me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Olivia Chen, and for as long as I can remember, I've been living in my sister Madeline's shadow. Growing up in Pinehurst, a small town tucked into the foothills of the Cascade Mountains, I quickly learned that no matter what I accomplished, I would never shine as brightly as Maddie. She was 3 years older, strikingly beautiful, and possessed the kind of magnetic charm that drew people to her like moths to a flame. Our modest 2-story colonial home on Spruce Avenue was practically a shrine to Maddie's existence. The living room walls displayed an impressive collection of her dance trophies, cheerleading medals, and pageant crowns. Scattered among them were framed photographs of Maddie in various elegant poses: Maddie in her homecoming dress, Maddie at the state dance championship, Maddie being crowned Miss Teen Pinehurst. Hidden in the corner, almost as an afterthought, was a single picture of me holding a first-place science fair certificate. My father, Richard Chen, managed the local credit union and was well respected in our community. My mother, Elizabeth, taught piano lessons from our home. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable enough to provide Maddie with expensive dance lessons, custom-made costumes, and frequent trips to regional competitions. Meanwhile, I saved my babysitting money to buy secondhand textbooks and laboratory equipment for my experiments. "Mom, can I join the Science Olympiad team?" I asked one evening after dinner, clutching the permission slip I'd been carrying around for 3 days. "The registration fee is $80. Mom glanced up from the stack of bills she was sorting through at the kitchen table. $80? That's quite expensive for a club, Olivia. But Maddie's dance competition entry fees are $200, and you pay those every month, I pointed out, immediately regretting my words when I saw Mom's expression harden. That's different. Dancing is Maddie's passion. It could be her career. Besides, she has real talent. She sighed, returning to her bills. "We'll see about your science thing. Maybe next semester when things aren't so tight?" There never seemed to be a next semester when things weren't tight, at least not for my activities. Yet somehow money materialized whenever Maddie needed new point shoes or a costume for her latest recital. Don't misunderstand. I loved my sister. Maddie wasn't deliberately cruel or unkind to me. She simply accepted the family dynamic as the natural order of things. She'd occasionally tousle my hair and call me the brain of the family when I brought home straight A's. But there was always a subtle dismissiveness to her praise, as if academic achievements were somehow less impressive than performing a perfect arabesque. Our parents reinforced this hierarchy with their actions, if not their words. They never missed a single one of Maddie's performances, often rearranging their entire schedules to accommodate her rehearsals and competitions. Yet they routinely skipped my science fairs and academic award ceremonies, offering vague excuses about work commitments or scheduling conflicts. "We know you understand, Olivia," Dad would say. "You're our responsible one. You don't need us hovering over your shoulder all the time." Their absence was framed as a compliment to my independence rather than what it really was, a clear indication of their priorities. I found solace in my studies, particularly in chemistry and environmental science. Our house backed up to Carson Creek, a small tributary that fed into the larger Pinehurst River. From an early age, I'd been fascinated by the delicate ecosystem of the creek, The way water striders skimmed across the surface tension, the gradual shifts in pH levels after rainfall, the microscopic communities of organisms that thrived in its currents. By 14, I'd transformed my bedroom into a makeshift laboratory. My desk was cluttered with water testing kits, microscope slides, and notebooks filled with meticulous observations. I'd saved for months to buy a secondhand microscope from an online auction, and it became my most treasured possession. Through its lens, I discovered an entire universe that existed beyond the limited scope of my visible life. Mr. Levinson, my high school chemistry teacher, was the first person who seemed genuinely interested in my scientific pursuits. While my parents nodded absently whenever I tried to share my discoveries, Mr. Levinson listened with real engagement, asking thoughtful questions and suggesting new avenues for exploration. "You've got a real gift, Olivia," he told me after class one day during my sophomore year. "The way you approach problems, it's methodical but also intuitive. That's rare." I blushed at the compliment, unused to having my abilities acknowledged. "I just find it interesting, that's all." "No, it's more than that. You have the mind of a research scientist." He hesitated before continuing. "I'm starting an advanced placement environmental science program next semester. It's not officially on the curriculum yet, but the principal has approved it as an independent study option. I think you should be my first student." That conversation changed everything for me. In Mr. Levinson's class, I wasn't just Maddie's quiet little sister or the invisible daughter. I was a scientist with valuable insights and promising potential. For the first time, someone was seeing me clearly. Under his guidance, I designed a comprehensive study of Carson Creek's ecosystem, documenting how upstream agricultural runoff was affecting aquatic life. My research became increasingly sophisticated, incorporating chemical analysis, biological monitoring, and detailed statistical modeling. Mr. Levinson submitted my project to the Regional Environmental Science Symposium without telling me. When I received the acceptance email, I was stunned. They want me to present my findings in front of actual scientists? I couldn't believe it. "Not just present," Mr. Levinson said, grinning. "You're one of the keynote student speakers. This is a big deal, Olivia." I rushed home, desperate to share the news with my parents. Maybe now they would understand that my science thing wasn't just a hobby. It was a potential career, a passion every bit as legitimate as Maddie's dancing. I found them in the living room, huddled around Maddie, who was tearfully describing a fall she'd taken during rehearsal. An ankle sprain, apparently. Painful, but not serious. Both parents were focused entirely on her, offering ice packs and sympathetic murmurs. "Mom, Dad," I interrupted, unable to contain my excitement. "I've been selected as a keynote speaker at the Regional Environmental Science Symposium. My Carson Creek project was chosen from hundreds of submissions." Dad glanced up briefly. "That's nice, honey. We'll talk about it later, okay? Maddie needs us right now." Later never came. That evening, they drove Maddie to her dance instructor's house to discuss how the injury would affect her performance in an upcoming competition. My news was forgotten in the chaos of Maddie's minor crisis. The symposium fell on the same weekend as Maddie's regional dance championship. I didn't even bother asking if my parents would attend my presentation. I already knew the answer. Mr. Levinson drove me to the university where the event was being held and sat in the front row as I presented my findings to a room full of environmental scientists, college professors, and industry professionals. My hands trembled as I began speaking, but as I delved into my research, a strange calm settled over me. This was my element. These were my people. For 15 minutes, I owned that room, confidently answering complex questions and defending my methodology. When I finished, the applause was thunderous. Afterward, a woman approached me, introducing herself as Dr. Victoria Hammond from the Environmental Sciences Department at Berkeley. "Your research methodology is impressively sophisticated for someone your age," she said, handing me her business card. "We have a summer program for exceptional high school students. I'd like you to apply." I floated home on a cloud of validation, clutching Dr. Hammond's card like a towel. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mr. Levinson had recorded my presentation on his phone, and I couldn't wait to show my parents. Maybe seeing me in this context, confident, knowledgeable, respected by actual scientists, would finally make them understand. When I arrived home, the house was filled with celebration. Maddie had won grand champion at her competition, despite her injured ankle. The living room was festooned with balloons and congratulatory banners. Relatives and neighbors crowded around our dining table, which was dominated by a large cake emblazoned with, "Congratulations, Maddie," in swirling frosting. No one asked about my symposium. I slipped quietly upstairs, Dr. Hammond's card still clutched in my hand, and added it to my box of treasures. Small tokens of recognition that I collected like rare specimens, proof that I existed beyond the boundaries of my family's limited perception. The summer program at Berkeley was transformative. For 6 glorious weeks, I was immersed in a community that valued the very qualities my family overlooked. My research skills, analytical thinking, and methodical approach to problem solving weren't just acknowledged, they were celebrated. I thrived under the mentorship of Dr. Hammond, who treated me as a colleague rather than a child, challenging my assumptions and pushing me to refine my methodologies. "You have a unique perspective, Olivia," she told me during our final evaluation meeting. "Your work on watershed contamination shows remarkable insight. Have you thought about where you want to apply for college?" "Berkeley is my dream school," I admitted, "but the out-of-state tuition is pretty steep. My parents have been saving for my college education, but I'm not sure it'll be enough for Berkeley." "Apply anyway," she encouraged. "There are scholarships, financial aid packages, and based on what I've seen this summer, you'd be a very competitive applicant for our departmental scholarships." I returned home with renewed purpose and a clear vision for my future. Senior year would be crucial. Maintaining my perfect GPA, scoring well on standardized tests, finalizing my Carson Creek research for publication in a youth science journal. Berkeley wasn't just a dream anymore, it was a tangible goal. My parents seemed vaguely impressed when I shared my plans over dinner one night. "Berkeley? That's certainly ambitious," Dad said, raising his eyebrows. "Isn't that one of the most expensive public universities in the country?" "Yes, but I've been talking with Dr. Hammond about scholarship opportunities. And we've been saving for college since I was born, right? Between that and some financial aid, I think we can make it work." Mom and Dad exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. "We'll have to see what's practical when the time comes," Mom said carefully. "College is a big investment." Their lukewarm response dampened my enthusiasm, but I pushed forward with my plans. I spent the fall semester of senior year perfecting my college applications, writing and rewriting my personal essays until every word felt exactly right. Mr. Levinson and they could have offered them a temporary place in our home while they saved money. They could have considered that both their daughters deserved support, not just the one who had always been the favorite. I stood there, acceptance letter crumpled, in my fist, watching as they returned to their discussion of nursery furniture as if the matter was settled. In that moment, something crystallized within me. A cold, clear certainty that if I wanted a future, I would have to create it entirely, on my own. Without another word, I turned and walked upstairs to my bedroom. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I sent an email to Dr. Hammond, explaining my situation in stark, unembellished terms. Then I called Mr. Levinson. "They're using my college fund to buy Maddie a house," I told him, my voice eerily calm. "I got into Berkeley with a partial scholarship, but without the money they promised me, I can't go." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Mr. Levinson finally spoke, his voice was tight with controlled anger. "Come over for dinner tomorrow. My wife and I need to talk with you about some options." That night, I lay awake, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck to my ceiling as a child. They were arranged in accurate constellations: Ursa Major, Cassiopeia, Orion, a reflection of my early fascination with scientific precision. Even then, I'd craved order and understanding in a household where I felt increasingly invisible. By morning, I'd made a decision. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't try to change their minds. I would find another way, my own way, to claim the future I'd worked so hard to earn. The Levinsons lived in a modest craftsman-style home near the high school. When I arrived for dinner the next evening, I was surprised to find Dr. Hammond there as well, having driven 2 hours from Berkeley. "Olivia," she said, embracing me warmly. "Daniel called me last night. I'm so sorry about your situation." Mr. Levinson, Daniel, gestured for me to sit at the dining table, which was covered with printed materials about scholarships, grants, and financial aid programs. "We've been doing some research," he said, "and we have ideas." Over homemade lasagna, the 3 adults outlined a plan that seemed almost too good to be true. Dr. Hammond had spoken with the department chair about my circumstances. "The Environmental Science Department has a full-ride scholarship that's usually reserved for second-year students," she explained. "It's called the Future Leaders in Environmental Research Grant. Given your exceptional work last summer and strong application, they're willing to consider you for it now." But the deadline for special scholarships was back in January, I said, confused. "Generally, yes," Dr. Hammond agreed. "But there's some flexibility in extraordinary circumstances. You'll need to submit an additional essay and have an interview with the scholarship committee next week. It's highly competitive. Only 1 student receives it each year. But I think you have a compelling case." Mrs. Levinson, a lawyer who specialized in family law, had been quietly taking notes. "In the meantime," she said, "we should discuss your living situation, Olivia. How are things at home right now?" I struggled to articulate the strange, tense atmosphere that had developed since yesterday. "It's uncomfortable. They're acting like nothing happened, like they didn't just take away my future. This morning, Mom asked if I wanted to help pick out paint colors for the nursery." I laughed, a hollow sound with no humor in it. "As if I care what color my sister's baby's room is going to be." The Levinsons exchanged a look. "Our daughter's room is sitting empty since she left for college," Mrs. Levinson said gently. "If you need somewhere to stay until graduation, or even through the summer, you're welcome here." I stared at them, overwhelmed by their kindness. These people, my teacher, his wife, a professor I'd only known for a summer, were rallying around me with more support than my own family had ever shown. "Thank you," I managed, my voice thick with emotion that I'd been suppressing for days. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll fight for your future," Dr. Hammond said firmly. "Say you won't let their choices define your path." For the first time since receiving my acceptance letter, I felt a flicker of hope. "I'll fight," I promised. "Whatever it takes." The next morning, I packed 2 suitcases with my essential belongings: clothes, toiletries, my laptop, and the scientific equipment that I couldn't bear to leave behind. I left a note on the kitchen counter explaining that I would be staying with the Levinsons until graduation, and that I would be pursuing alternative funding for Berkeley. I didn't ask for permission or forgiveness. I simply informed them of my decision. When I returned from school that afternoon to collect my things, the house was empty. My note sat untouched where I'd left it. As I loaded my suitcases into Mr. Levinson's car, I glanced back at the bedroom window where I'd spent countless hours dreaming of a future that seemed both impossible and inevitable. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were observing someone else's life from a great distance. "Ready?" Mr. Levinson asked, his kind eyes watching me carefully. I nodded, turning away from the house. Ready. The transition to living with the Levinsons was surprisingly seamless. Their home was filled with books, art, and interesting conversations, an environment that nurtured curiosity and independent thinking. For the first time, I experienced what it felt like to be part of a household where my interests and achievements were valued. My parents called 3 days after I left, their initial message filled with demands that I return home immediately. When I didn't respond, their tone shifted to concern, then grudging acceptance. "We just want to make sure you're safe, Olivia," Mom said in her final voicemail. "Mr. Levinson called us. We understand you're staying there for now. We hope you'll reconsider, but we respect that you're 18 and can make your own decisions." What they didn't say was that they recognized the hurt they'd caused, or that they regretted choosing Maddie's needs over mine yet again. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of broken promises. Just a reluctant acceptance that I had removed myself from their sphere of influence. I channeled all my energy into preparing for the scholarship interview and completing my final high school semester. The Levinsons helped me practice answering potential questions, offering constructive feedback and encouragement. Dr. Hammond arranged for me to meet virtually with current Berkeley environmental science students who had received the scholarship in previous years. The interview was scheduled for a Wednesday afternoon in April. I wore a borrowed blazer from Mrs. Levinson and sat at their dining room table, my laptop positioned to show a neutral background. For 90 minutes, I answered questions from a panel of professors and department administrators, discussing my research, my career goals, and the unique perspective I would bring to the program. "Ms. Chen," said the committee chair as the interview drew to a close, "your academic credentials are exceptional, and your research shows remarkable promise. But what strikes me most is your resilience. You've faced significant obstacles, yet you've maintained your focus and determination. That quality is as important in scientific research as intellectual ability." I held my breath for the next 7 days, checking my email compulsively every few hours. The Levinsons tried to keep me distracted with board games, hikes, and cooking projects, but the waiting was excruciating. The email arrived on a Thursday evening as we were finishing dinner. My hands shook so badly that Mrs. Levinson gently took my phone and read it aloud. "Dear Ms. Chen, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as this year's recipient of the Future Leaders in Environmental Research Full Scholarship. This award covers all tuition, fees, books, and housing for 4 years at the University of California, Berkeley, contingent upon maintaining academic standing." The rest of the email was drowned out by our cheers and tears. I was going to Berkeley after all, not on my parents' terms, but on my own merit. When I called Dr. Hammond to share the news, she wasn't surprised. "I knew you could do it, Olivia. This is just the beginning of what you'll accomplish." I graduated as valedictorian 2 weeks later. From the podium, I could see the Levinsons, beaming proudly from the front row, where parents typically sat. My actual parents and Maddie were somewhere in the middle of the audience. They'd arrived late and missed the processional. In my speech, I talked about resilience and finding support in unexpected places. "Sometimes the path we envision for ourselves is blocked," I said, looking directly at the Levinsons. "When that happens, we have a choice. Give up on the destination, or find another route." I'm grateful to those who helped me find another route when my original path disappeared. I didn't look at my parents as I spoke those words. This moment, like my future, belonged to me and to those who had truly invested in my success. As I stepped down from the podium, diploma in hand, I felt strangely weightless. The burden of seeking approval from people who couldn't or wouldn't see my worth had lifted. Ahead of me stretched a future I had secured through my own efforts and the support of my chosen family, the people who had recognized my potential when those who should have been my biggest advocates had failed. Berkeley awaited, and with it, a chance to reinvent myself not as the invisible daughter or the second-best sister, but simply as Olivia Chen, environmental scientist in the making. Whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms, with the knowledge that I was capable of creating opportunities even when others tried to take them away. The summer before Berkeley passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. I spent weekdays assisting Mr. Levinson with a research project at the local community college, cataloging changes in native plant populations around Pinehurst Lake. Weekends were devoted to shopping for dorm essentials with Mrs. Levinson, who insisted on buying me a proper set of luggage and a laptop that wouldn't crash during important assignments. Dr. Hammond called regularly with updates about housing, arrangements, and orientation schedules, her excitement for my arrival matching my own. My parents maintained a strained politeness whenever we crossed paths in town. They'd invited me to Sunday dinners, which I occasionally attended out of a sense of obligation rather than desire. These meals were uncomfortable affairs dominated by Maddie's pregnancy updates and discussions about renovations for their new house, the house purchased with what should have been my education fund. "We found the cutest nursery furniture set," Maddie gushed during one such dinner, scrolling through photos on her phone. "And the house has this perfect little room with southern exposure. Mom says that's important for a baby's room." I nodded and pushed food around my plate, wondering if anyone at the table remembered that they were celebrating their good fortune at my expense. The thought made my stomach clench, and I excused myself early, claiming homework for my summer research. Position. As I reached for my coat, Dad cleared his throat. "We're proud of you, Olivia. That scholarship. Well, it shows you've got real talent." The compliment, so long withheld and now so inadequate, stung worse than silence would have. "Thanks," I said flatly, though it would have been nice to hear that before you gave away my college fund. The flash of guilt that crossed his face provided small satisfaction as I walked out the door. August arrived with a mixture of anticipation and nerves fluttering in my stomach. The Levinsons insisted on driving me to Berkeley themselves, turning the 6-hour journey into a road trip complete with silly car games and stops at roadside attractions. "We wouldn't miss this for anything," Mrs. Levinson said when I protested that they'd already done too much. "Launching a student like you into the world is a privilege." My dorm room in the environmentally focused living-learning community was small but bright, with a large window overlooking a courtyard filled with native California plants. My roommate Zoe, a marine biology major from San Diego, arrived shortly after we did, her parents helping her arrange an impressive collection of surfing trophies on her desk. The Levinsons stayed long enough to help me unpack and take me shopping, for textbooks and groceries. When it came time for them to leave, Mrs. Levinson hugged me fiercely. "Our home is always open to you, holidays, summers, whenever you need it," she whispered. "You're family now." Mr. Levinson pressed a small wrapped package into my hands. "Just a little something to remind you where you came from," he said, "and where you're going." After they drove away, I unwrapped the gift. A beautiful glass, paperweight containing a perfect cross-section of creek sediment, layered with multicolored bands of soil, sand, and clay. Embedded in the center was a small metal tag engraved with the words, "The journey begins where you stand." I placed it on my desk where the light would catch it, a talisman of the support that had carried me to this moment. The first semester at Berkeley was both exhilarating and overwhelming. The campus hummed with intellectual energy, and I found myself surrounded by peers who shared my passion for environmental science. For the first time, my academic intensity wasn't something that set me apart, but something that helped me belong. Dr. Hammond proved to be more than just a mentor. She became my academic fairy godmother, checking in regularly and steering me toward opportunities that aligned with my interests. Within weeks, she'd arranged for me to join her research team as an undergraduate assistant, a position usually reserved for juniors and seniors. "Your experience with watershed analysis is exactly what we need for the Sierra Nevada project," she explained, showing me around the sophisticated laboratory where her team analyzed snow core samples. Besides, I promised the scholarship committee I'd keep you challenged. The work was demanding but deeply satisfying. Twice a month, we traveled to field sites in the mountains, collecting data on snowpack density and contamination levels. The findings were troubling. Microplastics were showing up in samples from even the most remote locations, but the process of scientifically documenting the problem felt like a necessary first step toward solving it. Back on campus, I thrived in my classes, finding particular joy in environmental chemistry and ecological modeling. The scholarship covered all my educational expenses, but I still worked part-time in the department office to earn spending money and build professional connections. Between classes, research, and work, I barely had time to think about Pinehurst or my family's situation, which was precisely how I wanted it. October brought midterms and the birth of Maddie's daughter, Emma Louise. Mrs. Levinson forwarded me the birth announcement email, complete with pictures of a red-faced newborn cradled in my sister's arms. My parents beamed proudly in the background, newly minted grandparents reveling in the moment. I sent a polite congratulatory text to Maddie and a small package containing a children's book about protecting the environment. "For when she's older," I wrote on the card. "Congratulations on your new family." The acknowledgement felt sufficient, cordial, but distant, like sending regards to a cousin or former neighbor. I didn't feel the emotional pull I'd expected at becoming an aunt. The baby was a stranger to me, an unwitting participant in the family dynamic that had pushed me to the margins. Perhaps someday we would develop a relationship, but for now, I needed the emotional distance to focus on building my new life. Thanksgiving approached, bringing the question of where to spend the holiday. The Levinsons had already invited me to join them, but a guilty sense of obligation made me consider my parents' invitation as well. I was contemplating this dilemma in the library when my phone buzzed with a text from Maddie. "Please come home for Thanksgiving," it read. "Mom and Dad miss you. I miss you. And Emma should meet her aunt." I stared at the screen, a familiar knot of resentment tightening in my chest. The casual assumption that I would simply slot back into family gatherings as if nothing had happened felt presumptuous at best, manipulative at worst. There was no acknowledgement of what their decision had cost me, no recognition of how their choices had fundamentally altered our relationship. After considerable reflection, I declined both invitations, choosing instead to remain on campus for the break. Several international students were organizing a potluck dinner, and Dr. Hammond had mentioned that her lab would be running time-sensitive experiments that weekend. "We could use an extra pair of hands if you're around," she'd said casually, making it clear that the offer was optional. The 4-day weekend passed peacefully. I contributed a vegetable casserole to the international students' dinner, learning how different cultures celebrated harvest festivals while sharing stories about our varied backgrounds. The lab work with Dr. Hammond proved fascinating. We were testing a new methodology for identifying pharmaceutical residues in water samples, and the quiet campus provided perfect conditions for focused research. On Saturday evening, Dr. Hammond invited me to her home for leftovers. Her modest craftsman-style house near campus was filled with artifacts from her research travels: masks from Papua New Guinea, textiles from Peru, fossils from various continents. Her husband, a soft-spoken anthropology professor, served homemade pie while their 2 border collies vied for attention at my feet. "How are you settling in, really?" Dr. Hammond asked as we sat in her book-lined study after dinner. Not just academically, but personally. I considered the question carefully. "I feel like I can breathe here," I said finally. "Like I don't have to make myself smaller to fit into someone else's narrative about who I am or what I should want." She nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. "That freedom is precious. Guard it carefully. But don't mistake independence for isolation. Building meaningful connections will sustain you through the challenging times ahead." "Is that what you did?" I asked, curious about her own journey. My path wasn't as dramatic as yours, she admitted with a gentle smile. But yes, I had to break some family expectations to pursue science in the 1980s. My father wanted me to study business, follow him into the family company. We didn't speak for nearly 2 years after I chose environmental science instead. She paused, gazing at a photograph on her desk of an elderly couple standing beside her at what appeared to be an award ceremony. We reconciled eventually, on more equal terms, but only after I'd established myself on my own merits. Her words stayed with me long after I returned to my dorm room that night. The possibility that estrangement might be temporary rather than permanent offered a perspective I hadn't considered. Perhaps someday, my relationship with my parents might evolve into something healthier, not through my accommodation of their behavior, but through their recognition of me as an autonomous adult worthy of respect. Winter break presented a similar dilemma regarding where to spend the holidays. This time, I split the difference. 3 days with my parents in Pinehurst, followed by a week with the Levinsons, who had planned a ski trip to Lake Tahoe and insisted I join them. The atmosphere at my parents' house was strained, but not hostile. They had converted my bedroom into a guest room with impersonal hotel-like decor, erasing most traces of my existence there. My belongings had been packed into boxes stored in the garage. "We weren't sure what you'd want to keep," Mom explained awkwardly when I inquired. Maddie and Jason visited daily with baby Emma, who was indeed adorable with her tiny rosebud mouth and curious eyes. I found myself warming to my niece despite my reservations, though I maintained a careful emotional distance from my sister and her husband. Their house, my house, in an alternate universe where promises were kept, was apparently coming along nicely, with move-in planned for February. "We can't thank you enough," Jason said during Christmas dinner, raising his glass in my direction. "If your parents hadn't helped with the down payment, we'd be stuck in that awful apartment for years." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table as everyone registered the tactlessness of his gratitude. I focused on cutting my turkey into precise pieces, fighting the urge to point out that their good fortune had come at my expense. "Olivia has a full scholarship to Berkeley," Dad said finally, an odd note of defensiveness in his voice. "Everything worked out for the best." I looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "Yes. Fortunately, I found another way to fund my education. Not everyone in my position would have had those connections or opportunities." The implied criticism hung in the air like frost, crystallizing the unspoken tension between us. Mom quickly changed the subject to safer territory: Emma's first Christmas, the upcoming town festival, a neighbor's recent kitchen renovation. The relief I felt upon arriving at the Levinsons' rented cabin in Tahoe was palpable. Here was a family who celebrated my achievements without caveat or comparison, who valued me for exactly who I was. We spent mornings skiing, afternoons playing board games by the fire, and evenings stargazing from the hot tub on the deck. Mrs. Levinson took dozens of photos, insisting that I feature prominently in the family holiday album. "New tradition," she declared, arranging us for a group photo in matching flannel pajamas on New Year's Eve. Same time, same place next year. The unquestioned assumption that I would remain part of their lives long-term brought tears to my eyes. This was what family should feel like. A soft place to land, a launching pad for growth, a circle that expanded to include rather than contracted to exclude. My second semester at Berkeley unfolded with increasing momentum. Dr. Hammond's research team received a major grant to expand our watershed contamination study, and I was assigned responsibility for coordinating undergraduate contributions to the project. The position came with a stipend that allowed me to reduce my office hours and focus more on research, a significant opportunity that would strengthen my graduate school applications down the road. Spring break brought another invitation from my parents, this one extended with unusual persistence. "We'd really like you to come home, Olivia," Mom said during one of our infrequent phone calls. There's something important we want to discuss with you. Curiosity overcame my reluctance, and I agreed to spend 3 days in Pinehurst. The something important turned out to be a proposal. Dad had been promoted to regional manager at the Eastside Credit Union, a position that came with a substantial salary increase. He and Mom wanted to establish a small trust fund for me, to make up for what happened with your college fund. It won't be available until you're 25, Dad explained, pushing paperwork across the kitchen table. But it should help with graduate school or buying a home someday. I stared at the documents, emotions warring within me. The gesture was both too little and too late, an acknowledgement of wrongdoing without the courage to name it explicitly as such. Yet it also represented a tangible effort to rectify their mistake, to reinvest in my future after divesting from it so completely. Why now? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Mom and Dad exchanged glances. We've been doing a lot of thinking, Mom said hesitantly, about how we've treated you compared to Maddie, about the choices we made. It wasn't fair to you. The admission, partial though it was, cracked something open inside. Me? Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the prerequisite for it. No, it wasn't, I agreed quietly. And a trust fund doesn't erase that history. We know, Dad said, looking genuinely remorseful. We're trying to do better, Olivia. We're trying to understand where we went wrong. I signed the paperwork with mixed feelings. The trust fund was objectively beneficial to my long-term financial security, and refusing it would have been self-defeating. But I made it clear that money alone couldn't restore what had been broken between us. I appreciate the gesture, I said as I prepared to leave. But rebuilding trust takes more than financial compensation. It requires consistent effort over time. They nodded, accepting the implicit challenge in my words. As I drove back to Berkeley in my used Honda Civic, a practical graduation gift from the Levinsons, I felt oddly light, as if I'd set down a heavy burden I'd been carrying for months. My parents' acknowledgement, however belated, validated what I had always known. Their treatment of me had been fundamentally unfair. That admission created space for something new to potentially grow between us, not the unconditional devotion of a child desperate for approval, but perhaps eventually the measured respect of adults who recognized each other's worth. Summer arrived, bringing with it the anniversary of my departure from Pinehurst. The year had transformed me in ways both visible and invisible. Physically, I carried myself with more confidence, no longer hunching to minimize my presence in rooms where I felt unwelcome. Intellectually, I had flourished under Dr. Hammond's mentorship, earning the highest grades in several advanced courses and securing authorship on a forthcoming paper about microplastic contamination in Sierra Nevada watersheds. But the most profound changes were internal. I no longer measured my worth against my sister's accomplishments or calibrated my ambitions to fit within my parents' limited vision. The constant, corrosive sense of being overlooked had faded, replaced by a growing certainty about my path and purpose in the world. Dr. Hammond had arranged for me to participate in a prestigious summer research program at the university's mountain research station. 10 undergraduates from across the country would spend 8 weeks conducting independent projects under the guidance of leading scientists in various environmental disciplines. The position included a generous stipend and would further strengthen my research portfolio for graduate school applications. 2 days before I was scheduled to leave for the mountains, I received an unexpected call from Maddie. Her voice sounded strained with Emma crying in the background. "Olivia, I'm sorry to ask this, but I really need help," she said, speaking rapidly as if afraid I might hang up. "Jason left, just packed his things and disappeared 3 days ago. I can't reach him, and his friends say he's moved to Portland with some girl he met at a concert." I gripped my phone tighter, processing this information. "I'm sorry to hear that, Maddie. That's really tough. Mom and Dad are in Europe for their anniversary trip," she continued, her voice cracking. I'm all alone with Emma, and I can't do this by myself. The mortgage payment is due next week, and I don't have enough in my account. Jason was supposed to contribute half. The familiar pattern revealed itself. Maddie in crisis, requiring family resources to solve her problems. But this time, the resources she sought were mine. "What exactly are you asking me for?" I said carefully. "Could you come home, just for a few days until Mom and Dad get back? I need help with Emma, and maybe you could loan me money for the mortgage payment? I'll pay you back as soon as I figure things out." I closed my eyes, conflicting emotions washing over me. My first instinct was refusal. Why should I rearrange my life and deplete my savings to rescue Maddie from yet another poor decision? The summer research position was critical, for my career path, and my savings were meant for graduate school application fees. But beneath the resentment stirred a more complicated feeling. Maddie was no longer the golden child, effortlessly attracting parental resources and affection. She was a single mother abandoned by her partner, genuinely struggling and reaching out for help. The house that had symbolized my parents' unfair prioritization was now a burden threatening to crush my sister. "I can't come to Pinehurst," I said finally. "I've committed to this research position, and it starts in 2 days. But I can transfer some money to help with this month's mortgage payment." "Really?" The relief in her voice was palpable. "Oh God, thank you, Olivia. I know I don't deserve your help after everything." "This isn't about deserving," I interrupted. "It's about making a choice to help family in an emergency. But Maddie, this is a one-time thing. You need to figure out a sustainable solution." I know, she said quickly. "I've already applied for 3 jobs, and I'm looking into childcare assistance programs. I'm going to get it together, I promise." After we hung up, I sat motionless on my dorm bed, trying to understand my own motivations. Was I helping Maddie out of genuine compassion, or was there a perverse satisfaction in reversing our traditional roles, positioning myself as the capable provider and Maddie as the desperate recipient of charity? Perhaps it was both. Human motivations are rarely pure, especially when entangled with decades of family dynamics. But I knew with certainty that I didn't want to perpetuate the cycle of inequity that had characterized our childhood. I would help Maddie this once because it was within my power to do so, but I wouldn't sacrifice my own future to repeatedly rescue her from the consequences of her choices, just as she hadn't sacrificed her interests for mine. I transferred $200 from my savings account to Maddie's, enough to cover the mortgage payment with a small cushion for groceries and baby supplies. Then I finished packing for the research station, determined not to let family drama derail my professional trajectory again. The mountain research station proved to be even more transformative than I'd anticipated. Nestled in a subalpine meadow at 9,000 feet elevation, the cluster of rustic cabins and sophisticated laboratories hummed with intellectual energy. My project focused on documenting changes in high-altitude wetland compositions in response to decreased snowpack, research with direct implications for water management policies in drought-prone regions. The work was physically demanding and intellectually rigorous. Days began before sunrise with sample collection in remote meadows, followed by hours of laboratory analysis and evenings of data interpretation and collaboration with fellow researchers. We worked 6 days a week, using our 1 day off to hike, rock climb, or simply rest in hammocks strung between pine trees, discussing scientific papers and personal philosophies with equal intensity. In this environment, severed from cell service, and immersed in meaningful work, the complications of my family situation receded into proper perspective. My identity as a scientist strengthened, reinforced by the respect of established researchers who treated me as a colleague rather than a student. Dr. Hammond visited midsummer, bringing supplies and collecting preliminary data for our department's ongoing projects. As we hiked to a remote sampling site, I shared the situation with Maddie and my decision to help financially, but maintain personal boundaries. You're learning the difference between being responsible to someone and being responsible for them, she observed, navigating around a fallen tree across the trail. It's one of life's most important distinctions. I just don't want to get pulled back into the old patterns, I admitted. For so long, everything revolved around Maddie's needs and wants. My parents enabled her dependence while expecting complete independence from me. I can't participate in that dynamic anymore. Dr. Hammond nodded thoughtfully. The challenge now is finding a middle path, supporting family without sacrificing your own well-being. It's a balance many of us struggle with throughout our lives. By the time I returned to Berkeley for my sophomore year, I had gained clarity about what I wanted in my relationship with my family moving forward. I would maintain connections with clear boundaries, holiday visits with defined beginnings and endings, regular but limited phone calls, occasional financial help for Maddie in true emergencies, but not ongoing support. My parents seemed to accept these terms, perhaps recognizing that limited access to my life was better than none at all. They made efforts to show interest in my research, asking specific questions about my projects rather than generic inquiries about school. They remembered important dates like presentations and exams, sending encouraging texts beforehand and following up afterward. Small gestures, but significant in their consistency. Maddie struggled with single parenthood, but gradually found her footing. She secured a job as an administrative assistant at the local hospital, arranged reliable childcare, and eventually refinanced the house to lower the monthly payments. Our relationship evolved into something resembling adult friendship, still marked by our history but not entirely defined by it. During my junior year at Berkeley, I received an unexpected email from my high school principal, Ms. Oakes. She was establishing a scholarship fund for promising science students from Pinehurst High School and wanted me to serve on the selection committee. Your story of perseverance and academic excellence would be inspirational for our current students, she wrote, particularly those facing financial or family obstacles to higher education. The invitation stirred conflicting emotions. Returning to Pinehurst as a success story felt simultaneously validating and uncomfortable, a reminder of both how far I'd come and the unnecessary struggles I'd endured to get there. After consultation with both Dr. Hammond and Mrs. Levinson, I accepted the position with one condition. I wanted to establish an additional support structure beyond financial assistance. Scholarship recipients would be paired with mentors in their field of interest and provided with guidance navigating the college application process, particularly regarding financial aid options beyond traditional family support. Money helps, but knowledge and connections are equally valuable, I explained to Ms. Oakes during our planning call, especially for students whose families can't provide those resources. The Pinehurst Science Opportunity Scholarship launched my senior year, funded primarily by a local technology company with additional contributions from community members including, somewhat surprisingly, my parents. The inaugural recipient was Jasmine Rodriguez, a brilliant first-generation college student whose research on local bat populations had earned regional recognition. At the award ceremony, held in the high school auditorium where I had once sat, unnoticed during assemblies, I shared an abbreviated version of my journey from overlooked student to environmental researcher. I spoke about the critical role mentors had played in my success, the importance of creating multiple pathways to higher education, and the responsibility of communities to nurture intellectual potential wherever it appeared. Talent exists everywhere, I concluded, but opportunity does not. This scholarship aims to narrow that gap, to ensure that financial circumstances don't determine which bright minds get developed and which remain undiscovered. The applause was gratifying, but more meaningful was the conversation with Jasmine. Afterward, her parents, who spoke limited English, had been uncertain about the college application process, but deeply supportive of their daughter's ambitions. What they lacked in practical knowledge, they compensated for with unwavering belief in her capabilities, the foundation I had never received from my own parents. They worked so hard to give me chances they never had. Jasmine explained as we discussed her undergraduate options. I don't want to disappoint them. The best way to honor their sacrifices is to pursue excellence in the field you love, I advised, recognizing both the privilege and burden of being a family's first college student. Success isn't measured by prestige or salary, but by the impact of your work and the integrity with which you pursue it. As I drove away from Pinehurst that evening, the small town where I'd felt so constrained, now visible only in my rearview mirror, I reflected on the circular nature of mentorship. Dr. Hammond and the Levinsons had extended themselves to support me when my biological family faltered. Now I was beginning to extend myself for students like Jasmine, creating opportunities where structural barriers might otherwise exist. This, I realized, was how individual transformation could spark systemic change, not through dramatic gestures or groundbreaking discoveries, but through the quiet, consistent work of recognizing potential in unexpected places and ensuring it had the resources to flourish. Graduate school applications dominated my final year at Berkeley. With Dr. Hammond's guidance, I applied to 5 top environmental science programs, focusing on institutions with strong watershed management and climate adaptation research. My publication record, research experience, and academic standing made me a competitive candidate, but the process remained nerve-wracking nonetheless. December brought acceptance letters from Stanford, MIT, and Yale, each offering substantial funding packages. The most attractive came from Stanford's Earth System Science Department, a full fellowship that included summer research opportunities in their international field stations. The decision seemed straightforward until an unexpected offer arrived. In January, Dr. Hammond called me into her office one rainy afternoon, closing the door, an unusual gesture that immediately put me on alert. I've been approached by the National Science Foundation about a special graduate fellowship program, she said, sliding a folder across her desk. They're funding 5 researchers to conduct a longitudinal study of climate change impacts on North American watershed systems. It's a 5-year commitment with guaranteed funding and direct mentorship from the country's top environmental scientists. I opened the folder, scanning the details with growing excitement. The fellowship would place recipients at different research stations across the continent, rotating annually to provide comprehensive training in various ecosystem types. The stipend was generous, the professional opportunities unparalleled. They've asked me to nominate one candidate from Berkeley, Dr. Hammond continued, watching my reaction carefully. I'd like to put your name forward, Olivia. But I want you to understand what this would mean for your graduate education. It's not a traditional PhD path. You'd be working primarily in the field, coming to Stanford only for short academic residencies. Your dissertation would develop directly from the research data you collect. Stanford? I asked, confused. I thought this was a National Science Foundation program. It is, but it's administered through Stanford's Environmental Partnership Initiative. You'd technically be enrolled in their graduate program, but following this alternative training model. It's an experimental approach to developing the next generation of climate scientists, immersive, interdisciplinary, and intensely practical. The opportunity was extraordinary, exactly the kind of meaningful, hands-on research I'd dreamed of conducting. But it would mean 5 years of constant movement, living in remote research stations, and limited time for traditional academic experiences. How soon do you need my decision? I asked, mind already racing through the implications. 2 weeks. And Olivia, this is highly confidential until the selections are finalized. The competition will be fierce. I left her office clutching the folder, torn between excitement and uncertainty. That evening, I made 2 phone calls. First to Mrs. Levinson, who had become my most trusted sounding board for major decisions, and then, somewhat surprisingly, to my mother. Mrs. Levinson's response was immediate and supportive. This is extraordinary, Olivia. A perfect match for your research interests and your independent work style. The networking opportunities alone would be invaluable. My mother's reaction was more measured. 5 years moving around the country? What about putting down roots? Somewhere? Building relationships? Having some stability? Her concerns reflected her own priorities, but they weren't entirely without merit. The fellowship would mean delaying certain aspects of adult life: home ownership, long-term relationships, geographic stability for half a decade. Was I comfortable with those trade-offs? "This is the kind of opportunity that shapes an entire career, Mom," I explained. "The connections and experience I'd gain would open doors that might otherwise remain closed." "I understand that," she said, surprising me with her next words. "And if this is what you want, you should absolutely pursue it. I just want to make sure you're considering all aspects of the decision." The fact that she was engaging with my choice as a legitimate life path, rather than dismissing it as impractical, marked significant progress in our relationship. 3 years ago, she would have immediately compared my choices unfavorably to Maddie's more traditional life milestones. Now she was treating my career aspirations with respect, even if she didn't fully understand them. After careful consideration, I accepted the nomination. The application process was intensive: a detailed research proposal, 3 interviews with senior scientists, and a practical field assessment at a research station in Colorado. When the call came confirming my selection as one of the 5 fellows, Dr. Hammond hugged me with uncharacteristic exuberance. "They made the right choice," she said firmly. "You're going to revolutionize how we understand watershed responses to climate stressors." Graduation approached with the bittersweet knowledge that I would soon be leaving Berkeley, the place that had become my true academic home. The Environmental Science Department organized a small reception for graduating seniors, where faculty, members shared anecdotes and wished us well in our future endeavors. Dr. Hammond's speech brought unexpected tears to my eyes. 3 years ago, Olivia Chen arrived at Berkeley with exceptional talent but limited resources, she told the assembled students and faculty. Today, she leaves us as one of the National Science Foundation's elite watershed research fellows, poised to make significant contributions to our understanding of climate adaptation strategies. Her journey reminds us that nurturing scientific potential isn't just an academic obligation, it's an environmental imperative. The challenges facing our planet demand that we develop every gifted mind, regardless of background or circumstance. My parents attended graduation, along with Maddie and Emma. The Levinsons sat with them during the ceremony, a visible symbol of how my chosen and biological families had gradually integrated over time. Watching them interact at the reception afterward, Mrs. Levinson showing Emma how to make origami frogs while my mother and father engaged Mr. Levinson in conversation about his latest research, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with the diploma in my hand. Later that evening, at a small dinner celebration, my father raised his glass in a toast. To Olivia, who showed us that determination and talent can overcome any obstacle, including parental short-sightedness. His voice cracked slightly on the last words, the closest he had ever come to a direct apology for their earlier failure to support my education. I acknowledged his words with a nod, neither rejecting the olive branch nor pretending it erased the past. We had reached a place of mutual respect, not the unconditional parent-child relationship of my earlier fantasies, but something more measured and ultimately more sustainable. The summer after graduation passed in a whirlwind of preparation for the fellowship. I spent 2 weeks at the Levinsons' home, sorting through possessions and packing what I'd need for a highly mobile lifestyle. Mrs. Levinson insisted on upgrading my camping equipment and winter gear, practical gifts for someone who would be spending significant time in remote field locations. "My outdoor survival skills need serious work," I admitted, as we struggled to assemble a new all-weather tent in their backyard. "I'm much more comfortable with lab equipment than camping equipment." "That's why they start you in the Southwest Station during summer," Mrs. Levinson laughed. "By the time you reach the Alaska Station next year, you'll be an old pro at wilderness living." A brief visit to Pinehurst followed, primarily to see Maddie and Emma before my extended absence. My niece, now a precocious toddler with Maddie's charm and surprising analytical tendencies, had become a bright spot in my family relationships. At nearly 3, she was obsessed with collecting and categorizing rocks, lining them up in meticulous rows on Maddie's porch and explaining their very important differences to anyone who would listen. "She reminds me of you at that age," Mom observed as we watched Emma carefully documenting her collection with crayon drawings. Always sorting things, looking for patterns. The comparison was offered as a compliment rather than a dismissal of Emma's interests, another small indication of how my parents' perspective had shifted. They now recognized the value in the methodical, analytical approach they had once overlooked in me. Maddie had stabilized her life impressively since Jason's departure. She'd been promoted to department supervisor at the hospital, enrolled in night classes at the community college, to earn a healthcare administration degree, and created a structured but loving environment for Emma. The house that had once symbolized my parents' inequitable treatment of their daughters had become a genuine home, filled with evidence of Maddie's growing independence and Emma's developmental milestones. "I never properly thanked you," Maddie said during a rare moment alone together, Emma having been put to bed after extracting promises that her rock collection would remain undisturbed overnight. "Not just for the money when Jason left, but for not holding a grudge. You could have cut me off completely, and no one would have blamed you." I considered her words carefully. "Family relationships aren't accounting ledgers," I said finally. "We don't need to balance everything perfectly to remain connected, but we do need basic respect and recognition of each other's value." "I understand that now," she said quietly. "I took so much for granted growing up, not just material advantages, but the way Mom and Dad always prioritized my needs. I didn't see how unfair it was until I had Emma and started thinking about what messages I want to send her about her own worth." It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation scene from a movie, complete with tears and dramatic embraces. But it represented something more durable, a genuine acknowledgement of past inequities and a commitment to different patterns moving forward. We would never be the kind of sisters who shared everything or relied primarily on each other for emotional support. But we had found a way to exist in each other's lives with authenticity and mutual respect. The fellowship began in September at the Southwestern Watershed Research Station near Tucson, Arizona. The 5 selected fellows, myself, Raj from Cornell, Daniela from UCLA, Marcus from Howard University, and Toshiko from the University of Washington, would work as a cohesive research unit for the next 5 years, rotating through ecosystem types but maintaining collaborative relationships across distances. Our first assignment focused on desert riparian corridors under increasing stress from groundwater depletion and rising temperatures. Days began before dawn to avoid the worst heat, collecting soil samples, monitoring stream flow in ephemeral waterways, and documenting changes in vegetation patterns. Afternoons were devoted to laboratory analysis and data processing, followed by evening seminars with visiting researchers from around the world. The work was exhausting but exhilarating, providing immediate opportunities to apply theoretical knowledge to urgent environmental challenges. The 5 of us developed a tight-knit community, each bringing different strengths to our collective research. Raj's expertise in hydrological modeling complemented my background in contamination analysis, while Daniela's focus on vegetation communities, Marcus's specialization in climate data interpretation, and Toshiko's work on aquatic invertebrates created a comprehensive analytical framework. 6 months into the program, we presented our preliminary findings at a regional water management conference. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with several county officials requesting our guidance on revising water conservation policies. For the first time, I experienced the direct real-world impact of environmental research, not just academic publications, but actual policy changes informed by scientific evidence we had gathered. The second year took us to the Pacific Northwest, studying salmon-bearing watersheds threatened by changing precipitation patterns and warming water temperatures. Based at a remote station in the Cascade Mountains, we worked alongside indigenous water protectors, whose generations of observational data provided invaluable historical context for our measurements. Your scientific instruments confirm what our elders have been saying for decades, explained Clara, a tribal environmental officer who collaborated closely with our team. The stream temperatures are rising, the snowpack is declining, and the salmon runs are shifting earlier each year. This partnership transformed my understanding of environmental science, revealing how Western scientific methods could be complemented and enhanced by indigenous knowledge systems that incorporated centuries of careful observation and relationship-based monitoring practices. I began incorporating these perspectives into my documentation methods, creating space for qualitative observations alongside quantitative measurements. The third year brought us to the Great Lakes region, focusing on freshwater systems affected by industrial pollutants and invasive species. Based at a converted lighthouse on Lake Superior, we expanded our research to include remediation strategies for contaminated sediments and early detection protocols for emerging biological threats. It was during this rotation that I received an unexpected call from Ms. Oakes, my former high school principal. The Pinehurst Science Opportunity Scholarship had grown significantly over the past 3 years, now supporting 3 students annually, with financial assistance and mentorship. Jasmine Rodriguez, the inaugural recipient, was thriving at UC Davis and had established a remote tutoring program for rural high school students interested in environmental careers. "We'd like to formalize the mentorship component," Ms. Oakes explained. "Create a structured program pairing scholarship recipients with professionals in relevant fields. Would you be willing to help develop the framework? Your experience bridging academic and practical scientific applications would be invaluable." Despite my intensive fellowship responsibilities, I agreed to assist remotely, recognizing that expanding educational access represented another form of environmental stewardship. The future of climate science and conservation work depended on developing diverse talent pipelines that included students from all socioeconomic backgrounds. Over the next several months, I worked with Ms. Oakes and a small committee to establish the Pinehurst STEM Mentorship Network, connecting scholarship recipients with working scientists, engineers, and medical professionals who could provide guidance tailored to their specific interests and circumstances. My personal contribution included developing a resource guide for financially independent students navigating higher education without traditional family support. The 4th fellowship year brought an unexpected complication. Our Alaskan watershed station suffered significant damage during an unusually severe spring storm, delaying our planned research rotation. The program administrators scrambled to find alternative arrangements, eventually securing temporary facilities at a climate monitoring station in northern Minnesota. While the other fellows relocated immediately, I received permission to use the unexpected schedule change for a 3-week visit to Pinehurst, coinciding with the high school's annual science symposium, where the mentorship program would officially launch. The timing also allowed me to attend Emma's 6th birthday celebration, a milestone I had expected to miss. Returning to Pinehurst after nearly 4 years of limited visits felt surprisingly comfortable. The town itself appeared smaller than, in my memories, its boundaries more confined, its rhythms more predictable. Yet there was comfort in that predictability, a sense of grounded permanence that contrasted with my nomadic research life. My parents had aged noticeably, the physical manifestation of time's passage evident in my father's thinner hair and my mother's deeper laugh lines. They welcomed me with genuine warmth, having prepared my old room, now officially the guest. Room with thoughtful touches, a selection of recent environmental science journals on the nightstand, a new desk lamp for evening work, fresh wildflowers from the garden I had loved as a child. "We've been following your research publications," Dad said over dinner the first night. "I print them out for your mother, though I'm not sure either of us understands all the technical details." "The fact that you're trying means a lot," I assured them, touched by the effort this represented. not just reading academic papers outside their areas of expertise, but implicitly acknowledging the value of my chosen field. Maddie had blossomed into a capable single mother and healthcare administrator, her natural social intelligence now channeled into effective leadership at the hospital. Emma had grown from a rock-collecting toddler into a serious first grader, with an impressive vocabulary and insatiable curiosity about natural systems. "Aunt Olivia, can you explain how clouds turn into rain?" she asked within minutes of my arrival, barely pausing for breath before adding, "And why do some plants grow in water but others die if they get too wet? And how do fish breathe underwater when we can't?" Her rapid-fire questions reminded me of my own childhood inquiries, but unlike my experience, Emma's intellectual curiosity was actively encouraged by both Maddie and my parents. The science magazines scattered around Maddie's living room, the small microscope suitable for a 6-year-old, the nature identification guides with pages marked by colorful sticky notes, all indicated an environment where Emma's scientific interests were nurtured rather than marginalized. "She's definitely got the Chen scientific curiosity," Maddie said proudly as Emma carefully examined a butterfly wing with her microscope. "Mom's been taking her to the Children's Science Museum in Portland once a month. Dad built her that specimen collection cabinet for Christmas." The contrast with my own childhood experience could have triggered resentment, but instead, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and healing. Emma was receiving the support I should have had, and perhaps my struggles had helped create the conditions for her encouragement. My parents, having recognized their failure with me, were determined not to repeat the same mistakes with their granddaughter. The high school science symposium where we launched the mentorship program proved unexpectedly emotional. Standing in the auditorium where I had once felt so overlooked, addressing students and community members about educational equity and scientific opportunity, I experienced a powerful sense of closing a circle. Access to quality science education isn't just about individual advancement, I told the assembled audience. It's about ensuring that we develop every capable mind in service of solving our most pressing environmental challenges. The climate crisis, water scarcity, biodiversity loss. These issues require all available talent, regardless of economic background or family circumstance. Afterward, a quiet sophomore approached me, clutching a worn copy of a scientific journal containing one of my publications. "I've read all your papers on microplastic contamination," she said, eyes bright with intellectual hunger. "I've been doing my own water sampling in Miller Creek, and I think I've found something interesting, but I don't have the right equipment to analyze it properly." Her name was Zoe Matthews, and her methodical description of her sampling protocols and preliminary findings immediately impressed me. Within 15 minutes, I had arranged for her to use laboratory facilities at the community college under Mr. Levinson's supervision and connected her with Jasmine Rodriguez as a potential mentor. "This is exactly why we created this program," I told her as she carefully noted down contact information and equipment specifications. "To ensure that geographic location and financial circumstances don't limit scientific contributions." That evening, following the symposium, my parents hosted a small gathering at their home, a combination of celebrating Emma's birthday and marking the successful program launch. The guests included the Levinsons, several teachers from the high school, and 3 scholarship recipients with their families. Watching my mother enthusiastically explaining the scholarship structure to Zoe's parents, my father deepened conversation with Mr. Levinson about recent advances in chemistry education. I marveled at how circumstances had evolved. The divisions between my chosen and biological families had softened, creating a blended community united by shared values around education and opportunity. As the party wound down, Emma cornered me on the porch, her expression serious beyond her years. "Aunt Olivia, Mom told me that when you were my age, Grandma and Grandpa didn't help you with science stuff the way they help me." I hesitated, unsure how to respond age-appropriately to this perceptive observation. "That's partly true," I said carefully. "Different families go through different phases. When I was growing up, they didn't fully understand how important science was to me." She considered this, her small brow furrowed in concentration. "But they understand now, right? That's why they helped make your scholarship program?" "Yes, they understand now," I confirmed. "Sometimes people learn and grow and change their actions based on past mistakes. That's actually a very important part of both science and family relationships, being willing to examine results, recognize errors, and adjust approaches." Emma nodded solemnly, apparently satisfied with this explanation. "I'm going to be a scientist like you," she declared with absolute certainty. "But I'm going to study volcanoes instead of water." "The world needs volcanologists too," I agreed, hiding a smile at her conviction. "And you'll be an excellent one." Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed and most guests had departed, my father joined me on the porch swing, offering a cup of herbal tea. We sat in companionable silence for several minutes, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering darkness. "We got it wrong with you, Olivia," he said finally, his voice soft but clear in the evening quiet. "I've never properly apologized for that, have I? Not directly." "No," I agreed, neither accusatory nor dismissive. "You haven't." He nodded, accepting this truth. "I'm sorry we didn't see your gifts clearly. I'm sorry we didn't support your education the way we should have, and I'm most sorry that it took losing you to recognize what we had failed to nurture." The apology, explicit, unqualified, and long overdue, settled something restless within me. Not erasing the past, but acknowledging it honestly, creating space for a different future relationship. "Thank you for saying that," I replied simply. "It matters, even now." "You've created something remarkable," he continued, gesturing toward the house where information packets about the scholarship program remained spread across the dining table. "Not just your scientific work, which I'm told is exceptional, but this pathway for other young scientists. You've transformed your own difficult experience into opportunity for others." His assessment echoed my own reflections about my journey, how personal disappointment had ultimately fueled systemic change, how individual determination had created collective benefit. The scholarship program wouldn't single-handedly solve educational inequality, but it provided a template for how communities could better nurture talent, regardless of family circumstance or financial background. As I prepared to rejoin my research team in Minnesota the following week, I felt a sense of integration that had previously eluded me. The various facets of my identity, scientist, mentor, daughter, sister, aunt, no longer seemed to exist in separate compartments. I had found a way to weave them together into a coherent whole, maintaining boundaries where necessary, but allowing connections where beneficial. The fifth and final year of the fellowship took us to the Gulf Coast, studying watershed systems, affected by increasingly frequent hurricanes and rising sea levels. Based at a marine research station in Louisiana, we documented saltwater intrusion into freshwater marshes, changing fish migration patterns, and community adaptation strategies for climate resilience. Our work had direct implications for coastal communities facing displacement due to environmental changes, not abstract future threats, but immediate challenges affecting livelihoods, cultural practices, and basic habitability. Working alongside local residents, we developed citizen science protocols that incorporated traditional ecological knowledge and created accessible early warning systems for water quality changes. The culmination of our fellowship was a comprehensive report integrating 5 years of multi-ecosystem research into actionable policy recommendations for watershed management under climate change scenarios. The document, submitted to federal agencies and state environmental departments, represented a significant contribution to climate adaptation literature and provided the foundation for my doctoral dissertation. Stanford appointed a special committee to evaluate my unconventional PhD path, ultimately awarding the degree based on the exceptional quality and scope of the fellowship research. The commencement ceremony felt almost anticlimactic after 5 years of intensive fieldwork, but I appreciated the formal recognition of academic achievement that had once seemed so precarious. Job offers followed from universities, research institutions, and environmental consulting firms across the country. After careful consideration, I accepted a position with the newly established Climate Resilience Institute at the University of Washington, which would allow me to continue watershed research while developing educational programs for the next generation of environmental scientists. Before beginning this new chapter, I returned once more to Pinehurst for the high school graduation of Jasmine Rodriguez, the first scholarship recipient who had become an unofficial ambassador for the program. Watching her accept her diploma, knowing she was headed to UC Davis with full funding and mentorship support, I felt profound satisfaction in the knowledge that her path had been smoother than mine, not without challenges, but with structural support to help her navigate them. The scholarship program had expanded to include 5 students annually, with plans to establish a permanent endowment that would ensure its continuation regardless of economic fluctuations or changing community priorities. Local businesses had begun offering paid internships for scholarship recipients, creating practical experience opportunities alongside academic preparation. Most significantly, the mentorship network had grown to include former recipients like Jasmine, creating a self-sustaining cycle of guidance and support. The program's success had inspired similar initiatives in neighboring communities, gradually shifting regional attitudes about investing in scientific education, regardless of students' family backgrounds or financial circumstances. During this visit, I stayed with the Levinsons rather than my parents, a choice that reflected the enduring importance of my chosen family connections rather than any renewed tension with my biological relatives. Our relationships had stabilized into a comfortable pattern of mutual respect and limited but genuine affection. We would never recapture the idealized parent-child bond I had craved as a young person, but we had constructed something workable in its place. An adult relationship based on current interactions rather than past wounds. On my final evening, in Pinehurst, Emma asked if she could interview me for a school project about career paths in science. Just 10 years old, but remarkably poised, she set up her mother's tablet to record our conversation, consulting a list of carefully prepared questions. "What's the most important quality for a scientist to have?" she asked, her expression serious as she waited for my response. I considered the question thoughtfully, wanting to provide an answer that would serve her well, regardless of which scientific field ultimately captured her interest. "Persistence," I said finally. "The willingness to continue asking questions even when answers are difficult to find, or when others don't understand why your questions matter." She nodded, making a note beside her original question. "Is that what helped you become successful even when things were hard?" The perceptiveness of her inquiry, cutting straight to the core of my experience, momentarily took my breath away. "Yes," I confirmed. "Persistence helped me stay focused on my goals even when circumstances weren't ideal. But equally important were the people who recognized my potential and offered support when I needed it most." "Like my mom and grandparents help me with my science projects now?" she asked, making another note. "Exactly like that," I agreed, realizing that for Emma, family support for her scientific interests was simply the expected norm, the foundation I had worked so hard to create for subsequent generations. Having people who believe in your capabilities makes the journey easier. As I prepared to leave Pinehurst the next morning, I found myself reflecting on the circuitous path that had brought me to this point. The college fund diverted to my sister's house had seemed like an insurmountable obstacle, a devastating confirmation of my secondary status in the family hierarchy. Yet that apparent setback had ultimately propelled me toward mentors, opportunities, and achievements I might never have discovered otherwise. The scholarship that had replaced my lost college fund had become just the first link in a chain of academic and professional advancements. More importantly, it had inspired the creation of a program that now provided similar opportunities to students facing their own financial and family challenges, transforming a personal disappointment into a mechanism for systemic change. Standing at the Pinehurst bus station, waiting for the connection that would take me to the Portland airport and then onward to Seattle and my new position, I realized that success wasn't measured solely by individual achievement or professional recognition. It was also measured by the paths we cleared for others, the structures we built to ensure that talent could flourish regardless of circumstance. My parents had spent my college fund on my sister's baby. Then I got a full scholarship and built a legacy that would outlast all our individual journeys, a legacy of opportunity, mentorship, and environments where scientific minds could develop to their full potential. Not despite the obstacles I had faced, but because of how those obstacles had shaped my understanding of what truly mattered in supporting the next generation of scientific problem solvers. As the bus pulled away from the station, Pinehurst receding, behind me, I opened my laptop to review the curriculum for the undergraduate seminar I would be teaching in the fall. Pathways to Environmental Research: Creating Inclusive Scientific Communities. The course would incorporate everything I had learned about navigating academic systems with limited resources, identifying and cultivating scientific talent in unexpected places, and creating support structures that extended beyond financial assistance to include mentorship, connection, and validation. The journey from overlooked second daughter to respected environmental scientist and educator had not been linear or easy, but it had equipped me with precisely the perspective needed to help ensure that future scientific talent wouldn't be overlooked or underdeveloped due to financial limitations or family dynamics. Sometimes, I reflected, the most valuable contributions emerge not from seamless success stories, but from journeys marked by obstacles overcome and alternatives discovered when the expected path disappears. The diverted college fund that had once symbolized my marginalized family status had ultimately become the catalyst for a much more significant contribution, not just to my own education, but to educational access for generations of students who would never know my name, but would benefit from the structures my experience had inspired me to build. The University of Washington campus embraced me with its towering evergreens and views of distant snow-capped mountains. The Climate Resilience Institute occupied a renovated building near the Environmental Sciences Complex, its architecture a thoughtful blend of sustainable design principles and practical research functionality. Large windows captured natural light while sophisticated insulation systems minimized energy consumption. The symbolism wasn't lost on me, a physical manifestation of how scientific innovation could harmonize with natural systems rather than exploiting them. My position combined research leadership with educational program development, an ideal balance that allowed me to continue field investigations while establishing frameworks for training future environmental scientists. The Institute's director, Dr. Eleanor Winters, had specifically recruited me for my dual expertise in watershed systems and educational pathway creation. Most brilliant researchers can't effectively communicate their knowledge to non-specialists, she explained during my first week, and most skilled educators lack cutting-edge research experience. You bridge that gap, which makes you uniquely qualified to help us build our public engagement initiatives. The Institute's mission extended beyond traditional academic research to include direct community partnerships, policy advisory roles, and educational outreach to underrepresented populations. This holistic approach aligned perfectly with my evolving professional philosophy that environmental science must simultaneously advance technical knowledge, inform governance systems, and develop human capital across demographic boundaries. My first major project involved establishing the Watershed Monitoring Network, a citizen science initiative that trained community volunteers to collect standardized water quality data across the Pacific Northwest. Working with tribal environmental departments, rural conservation districts, and urban neighborhood associations, we developed accessible protocols that generated scientifically robust datasets while building public understanding of local ecological challenges. The program launched in 12 communities during its first year, expanding to 37 by the second. Participants ranged from retired engineers to middle school students, their diverse perspectives enriching our understanding of how different populations interpreted environmental changes. The data they collected supplemented our professional monitoring systems, providing granular insights that would have been impossible to capture with our limited research staff. More importantly, the network created pathways for participants to deepen their environmental engagement. Several high school volunteers progressed to university environmental programs, while community coordinators developed leadership skills that transferred to local governance roles. The initiative wasn't just generating scientific data, it was cultivating environmental citizenship across geographical and socioeconomic boundaries. Alongside this community work, I continued publishing academic research based on our ongoing watershed investigations. A comprehensive paper comparing climate adaptation strategies across ecosystem types received significant attention, leading to invitations to present at international conferences and consult on regional water management policies. My professional standing grew steadily, building credibility that I leveraged to advocate for inclusive approaches to environmental science education. During my second year at the Institute, I received an unexpected email from Emma, now 12 and increasingly independent in her communications. "Dear Aunt Olivia," she wrote with endearing formality, "I'm working on a science fair project about water quality in Carson Creek, the one behind Grandma and Grandpa's house that you studied when you were a kid. Mom says you're the expert on this. Can you help me design a good experiment?" The request sparked a flurry of video calls and carefully packaged equipment shipments. Emma proved to be a meticulous researcher, following sampling protocols with surprising precision for her age and asking insightful questions about methodology and data interpretation. Her project compared current water quality metrics with the historical data I'd collected years earlier, documenting concerning changes in pH levels and bacterial concentrations. "The creek is definitely more acidic now," she explained during one of our analysis sessions, her young face serious as she examined spreadsheets on her tablet. "And there's way more coliform bacteria after rainstorms. I think it's from the new housing development upstream. They cleared all the buffer vegetation that used to filter the runoff." Her observations were spot on. Professional quality analysis from a middle schooler with genuine scientific intuition. When her project won first place at the regional science fair, qualifying her for the state competition, I rearranged my schedule to attend the presentation in person. Watching Emma confidently explain watershed dynamics to judges and visitors, gesturing with the self-assured enthusiasm of someone completely in their element, I experienced a profound sense of generational progress. The scientific aptitude that had been overlooked in my childhood was being actively nurtured in Emma's generation, partly due to my own interventions in changing family and community attitudes toward STEM education. That evening, celebrating Emma's success over dinner with my parents and Maddie, I realized how significantly our family dynamics had evolved. My father asked detailed questions about Emma's methodology, demonstrating genuine interest in the scientific process rather than merely praising the achievement. My mother had created a scrapbook documenting Emma's project development, complete with photographs of sampling expeditions and data collection sessions. Most strikingly, Maddie had embraced her daughter's scientific inclinations with wholehearted support, despite having shown little interest in such topics during her own education. "I didn't understand this stuff in school," she admitted, as Emma excitedly explained her findings. But watching Emma work through problems, seeing how her mind connects ideas, it's amazing. I've been taking night classes in environmental science basics just to keep up with her questions. This transformation reflected broader shifts I'd observed in the decades since leaving Pinehurst, not just within my immediate family, but throughout the community. The Science Scholarship Program had elevated the prestige of scientific achievement among local students, while the mentorship network had created visible pathways for pursuing environmental careers regardless of financial circumstances. What had begun as a personal response to educational inequity had rippled outward, gradually reshaping cultural attitudes about scientific education and career accessibility. Emma's project won honorable mention at the state competition, an impressive achievement for a 7th grader competing against high school students. More importantly, the experience cemented her identity as a young scientist with valuable contributions to make. On the drive back to Pinehurst, she outlined ambitious plans for expanding her research to include multiple watershed locations the following year. "I need to learn more advanced statistical analysis," she declared, scrolling through university websites on her phone. "And maybe we could get funding for better equipment? I read about these new portable spectrometers that can detect microplastics in field samples." "Slow down," Maddie laughed, catching my eye in the rearview mirror. "Maybe finish middle school before you apply for research grants." "Aunt Olivia was doing watershed analysis when she was my age," Emma pointed out with the impeccable logic of early adolescence. "And she didn't have nearly as much support as I do." The observation, offered casually without any awareness of its emotional significance, crystallized how profoundly circumstances had changed. Emma took for granted the family encouragement and resource access that I had fought so hard to secure for myself. She didn't need to justify her scientific interests or defend their legitimacy. Those battles had already been won for her generation. Returning to Seattle after this visit, I felt a renewed sense of purpose in my educational outreach. Work. Emma represented one success story, a young scientist developing in supportive conditions, but countless others still faced structural barriers to pursuing STEM careers. The scholarship program in Pinehurst addressed financial obstacles for a small number of students, but systematic changes were needed to create truly inclusive pathways into environmental science. This conviction led me to establish the Environmental Science Access Initiative at the Climate Resilience Institute, a comprehensive program targeting multiple barriers to diversity in scientific fields. Beyond offering scholarships, the initiative provided mentorship connections, research assistantships, professional development workshops, and community support networks specifically designed for students from underrepresented backgrounds. "Scientific talent exists across all demographics," I explained to potential donors and institutional partners. "But opportunity doesn't. Our environmental challenges require mobilizing all available intellectual resources, which means intentionally developing talent that's currently overlooked or underdeveloped due to structural inequities." The initiative secured significant funding from both corporate sponsors and federal agencies, allowing us to launch programs in 15 high schools across Washington state. We prioritized rural communities, tribal reservations, and urban neighborhoods with limited STEM resources, creating customized approaches based on each community's specific needs and existing strengths. 3 years into this work, we began seeing measurable outcomes. Increased college science enrollment from partner schools, improved retention rates for scholarship recipients, and growing diversity among environmental science majors at regional universities. Individual success stories accumulated into statistical trends, demonstrating that intentional intervention could effectively address long-standing disparities in scientific career access. This professional momentum coincided with significant personal developments. After years of prioritizing geographic mobility and career establishment over long-term relationships, I had developed a serious connection with Dr. Marcus Reynolds, one of my former fellowship colleagues who had also joined the Institute as a research scientist specializing in climate data analysis. Our shared history of field research across diverse ecosystems provided a foundation of mutual understanding that transcended typical relationship dynamics. We spoke a common language of environmental observation, scientific methodology, and professional dedication that made communication effortless even on complex topics. More importantly, Marcus respected my independence and ambition, never expecting me to diminish my professional identity to accommodate relationship conventions. After 2 years of increasingly intertwined personal and professional lives, we decided to purchase a small house together near campus, a modest craftsman with a large yard perfect for native plant gardening, and a dedicated home office where we could work on research papers during weekends. The decision represented a significant shift for someone who had lived nomadically for much of her adult life, but the stability felt grounding rather than constraining. "I never thought I'd be a homeowner," I confessed to Mrs. Levinson during one of our regular phone conversations. After years of field stations and temporary accommodations, having permanent walls around me feels almost surreal. "Roots and wings, Olivia," she replied with characteristic wisdom. "You needed strong wings first to discover your path. Now you're establishing roots from a position of self-knowledge rather than limitation. That makes all the difference." As Marcus and I settled into our shared life, integrating professional collaboration with domestic partnership, I reflected on how my understanding of family had evolved over the years. The painful rupture with my biological family had initially seemed like an irrevocable loss, but it had ultimately led to a more expansive conception of kinship, one based on mutual respect, shared values, and chosen connections rather than merely biological ties. The Levinsons remained central figures in my life, our relationship deepening despite geographic distance. They visited Seattle twice yearly, filling our guest room with their warm presence and engaging enthusiastically with our professional community. I returned to their home each Christmas, maintaining holiday traditions that had sustained me during challenging transitions. My relationship with my biological family had stabilized into something I would characterize as guardedly positive, limited in emotional intimacy, but functional and occasionally rewarding. Regular video calls with Emma maintained our special bond, while quarterly visits to Pinehurst kept me connected to the scholarship program's development and my niece's educational journey. My parents had continued their gradual evolution, finding ways to express support that respected my independence, rather than attempting to reclaim parental authority they had forfeited years earlier. They followed my professional achievements with genuine interest, occasionally attended my presentations when I spoke at regional conferences, and had even made substantial donations to both the Pinehurst Scholarship Program and the Environmental Science Access Initiative. These contributions, financial and attentional, didn't erase past wounds, but they demonstrated meaningful growth and recognition of values I had fought to establish. We would never recapture the uncomplicated parent-child relationship that might have existed in an alternate timeline where they had supported my education from the beginning. But we had constructed a workable adult relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation or resentment. In my mid-30s, I received an unexpected honor: selection for the prestigious Waterman Environmental Leadership Award, recognizing scientists whose work combined research excellence with community impact. The award ceremony in Washington, D.C. coincided with the publication of a major paper documenting our findings from the Watershed Monitoring Network's first 5 years of data collection, a satisfying confluence of academic recognition and community engagement outcomes. When I shared the news with my various family constellations, their responses illustrated how each relationship had evolved over time. Marcus immediately began planning logistical details for the trip, instinctively understanding the professional significance while giving me space to process the personal meaning. The Levinsons expressed wholehearted pride without qualification, Mrs. Levinson's voice breaking slightly as she declared, "We always knew you were destined for extraordinary impact." My parents' reaction reflected their ongoing effort to engage appropriately with my professional achievements. "We'd like to attend the ceremony if that wouldn't make you uncomfortable," my father said carefully during our phone conversation. "We understand if you'd prefer to keep this in your professional sphere." The acknowledgement of boundaries, the recognition that they needed to be invited rather than assuming automatic inclusion, represented significant growth in our relationship. After consideration, I extended the invitation, appreciating this opportunity to integrate different aspects of my life journey into a coherent narrative. The award ceremony gathered environmental leaders from across the country, creating valuable networking opportunities alongside the formal recognition. My acceptance speech acknowledged the various influences that had shaped my approach to environmental science and education, from early watershed explorations behind my childhood home to the fellowship that had exposed me to diverse ecosystem types across the continent. Environmental challenges require mobilizing all available talent, I emphasized, reiterating the core philosophy that guided my work. That means intentionally removing barriers that prevent certain populations from contributing their intellectual capacity to scientific problem solving. Climate resilience depends not just on technological innovation, but on human capacity development across demographic boundaries. Afterward, at the reception, I introduced my diverse support network to professional colleagues. Marcus, the Levinsons, my parents, Dr. Hammond and Dr. Winters, standing together in a visual representation of how disparate life threads had woven into a coherent professional identity. The image captured something essential about my journey: how apparent obstacles had ultimately created unexpected pathways, how initial rejection had led to more meaningful connection, how personal disappointment had fueled systemic improvement efforts. Later that evening, in a quiet moment at the hotel bar, my father attempted to articulate something that had clearly been on his mind. "Watching you today," he said hesitantly, "I realized something I've never properly acknowledged. Your success isn't despite our failures as parents. It's entirely independent of them. You would have found your path regardless of our choices." The insight, though belated, demonstrated a fundamental shift in perspective, recognition that my achievements belonged wholly to me rather than existing in relation to parental action or inaction. Neither his pride nor his regret was relevant to my professional standing. Both were simply his emotional responses to witnessing outcomes that had been shaped primarily by my own determination and the support of chosen mentors. "That's true," I agreed simply, "but I'm glad you can see it now." The conversation marked another small step in our evolving relationship. Not dramatic reconciliation or complete healing, but incremental progress toward mutual recognition of separate but occasionally intersecting life journeys. Returning to Seattle after the award ceremony, I channeled the professional momentum into expanding our educational initiatives beyond Washington State. The Environmental Science Access Initiative had demonstrated sufficient success to attract national foundation interest, opening possibilities for implementing similar programs in communities across the country. Working with a team of educational specialists and environmental scientists, I developed a replicable model that could be adapted to diverse regional contexts while maintaining core principles of financial support, mentorship connection, and community engagement. The expanded program launched in 50 additional communities over the next 3 years, creating a national network of environmental science pathway programs specifically designed for students facing socioeconomic barriers. As these professional accomplishments accumulated, I occasionally reflected on the irony that had shaped my life trajectory. Had my parents fulfilled their original promise to fund my education, I likely would have completed a traditional academic path: college, graduate school, perhaps a university research position focused primarily on publishing papers and securing grants. Instead, their decision to redirect my college fund to my sister's house had catalyzed a chain of events that ultimately led to more meaningful impact. The scholarship that replaced family support had connected me with mentors who expanded my conception of scientific contribution. The painful experience of educational abandonment had sensitized me to structural barriers facing other students. The necessary independence had fostered resilience that served me well during challenging field research conditions. This wasn't to suggest that their actions had been justified or that familial betrayal was somehow beneficial. Rather, it illustrated how determined individuals could transform obstacles into alternative pathways, not just surviving disappointment, but using it as motivation to create systemic improvements that benefited others facing similar challenges. Emma's journey, perhaps, best exemplified the intergenerational impact of these transformation efforts. At 16, she had developed into a poised young scientist with clear professional aspirations and the family support I had lacked at her age. Her watershed research had expanded into a sophisticated citizen science project involving multiple schools across 3 counties, documenting concerning trends in water quality throughout the regional system. When she was selected to present her findings at a national youth science conference, I arranged my schedule to attend as moral support. Watching her confidently navigate questions from professional scientists, explaining methodology decisions with technical precision while maintaining accessible language for non-specialists, I felt profound satisfaction in witnessing scientific talent properly nurtured across generations. "Your niece is remarkable," commented a colleague who had attended the presentation. "Such poise and analytical clarity at her age. You must be very proud." "I am," I agreed. "But more importantly, I'm hopeful. She represents what's possible. When we remove obstacles to scientific talent development, when we support intellectual curiosity rather than dismissing it, when we provide resources rather than withholding them, when we connect promising minds with appropriate mentorship." Emma's subsequent acceptance to Berkeley's environmental science program, with a full merit scholarship, completed a circle that felt meaningful without being miraculous. Her achievement wasn't a cosmic balancing of scales, but the logical outcome of intentional systems designed to nurture scientific potential, regardless of family financial circumstances. The trust fund my parents had established years earlier as partial atonement remained untouched, its value growing steadily as I built financial security through my professional position. After careful consideration, I decided to redirect these resources toward expanding educational access initiatives, transforming what had been intended as personal compensation into collective benefit. Working with financial advisors and educational specialists, I established the Science Pathway Foundation, an independent nonprofit organization dedicated to creating comprehensive support systems for aspiring scientists from underrepresented backgrounds. The foundation would outlast my personal involvement, institutionalizing approaches that had proven effective through the Pinehurst program and the Environmental Science Access Initiative. At the foundation's launch event, I found myself addressing a diverse audience of educators, scientists, community leaders, and students, many of whom had benefited from the very programs that had inspired this expanded effort. Standing at the podium, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment, the complex interplay of personal disappointment and professional purpose that had shaped my approach to environmental science education. 10 years ago, when my college fund was redirected to my sister's housing needs, I viewed it as an insurmountable obstacle to my educational aspirations, I acknowledged candidly. Today, I recognize it as the catalyst that forced me to discover alternative pathways, not just for myself, but ultimately for hundreds of students facing similar barriers. The statement wasn't meant to excuse past injustice or romanticize hardship, but to illustrate how determined individuals could transform personal setbacks into systemic improvements. My parents' decision to prioritize my sister's needs had unintentionally launched a journey that extended far beyond individual educational attainment to address fundamental questions about scientific talent development and career pathway access. As the foundation began its work, supporting cohorts of students across the country with comprehensive resources and mentorship connections, I occasionally received letters from participants describing how these opportunities had changed their educational trajectories. Their stories echoed elements of my own experience: the validation of having potential recognized, the practical value of financial support, the transformative impact of appropriate mentorship. One particularly memorable message came from Zoe Matthews, the quiet sophomore who had approached me years earlier at the Pinehurst High School Science Symposium. Now completing her PhD in hydrogeology at Stanford, She wrote to share news of her recent publication in a prestigious journal. "I still remember showing you my primitive water sampling data and you taking it seriously, treating me like a real scientist when I was just a kid with curiosity and limited equipment," she wrote. That moment fundamentally changed how I viewed myself and my potential contributions to environmental science. The scholarship made my education financially possible, but that initial validation made it psychologically possible. Her words captured the essence of what I had attempted to create through various educational initiatives. Not just financial pathways, but psychological permission structures that allowed talented individuals to envision themselves as legitimate contributors to scientific knowledge regardless of background or circumstance. 20 years after my parents diverted my college fund to my sister's house, I stood in my office at the Climate Resilience Institute, surrounded by evidence of a life's work that had far exceeded my adolescent aspirations. The walls displayed watershed maps from research sites across the continent, photographs of student groups participating in monitoring programs, and framed awards recognizing both scientific contributions and educational innovation. The journey had not been what I had planned or expected. The path from overlooked second daughter to recognized environmental scientist and educational pathway architect had involved detours, obstacles, and unexpected assistance from mentors who recognized potential when family support faltered. Yet, these very complications had ultimately enabled greater impact than might have been possible through a more conventional trajectory. The experience of educational abandonment had sensitized me to structural barriers facing countless talented students. The necessity of finding alternative resources had connected me with mentors who expanded my conception of scientific contribution. The struggle for validation had motivated systematic efforts to ensure other promising minds wouldn't face similar obstacles. My parents had spent my college fund on my sister's baby. Then I got a full scholarship and built something far more valuable than individual educational attainment: a sustainable system for identifying and developing scientific talent regardless of family financial circumstances or background. Not despite the obstacles placed in my path, but because those very obstacles had revealed the necessity of creating multiple pathways into scientific careers. The legacy would continue beyond my personal involvement, institutionalized through the Science Pathway Foundation and replicated in communities across the country. Each cohort of supported students would progress to mentorship roles themselves, creating an ever-expanding network of scientific talent development that crossed socioeconomic boundaries and challenged traditional assumptions about who could contribute to environmental problem-solving. This, ultimately, was the most satisfying resolution to my disrupted educational journey. Not personal success alone, but systematic improvement that would benefit generations of aspiring scientists. Long after my particular story had faded from memory, the college fund that had been redirected had launched a pathway architect rather than merely an individual scientist, transforming a private family decision into a catalyst for public educational innovation with impacts that continued to multiply with each passing year. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. Hammond both wrote glowing letters of recommendation. By December, my applications were submitted, and all I could do was wait. Meanwhile, Maddie had graduated from community college with an associate's degree in general studies and moved back home. Her dancing career hadn't materialized as our parents had hoped. After a failed audition for a regional dance company, she'd lost interest in pursuing dance professionally and was now drifting between part-time retail jobs, uncertain about her future. "It's just a phase," I overheard Mom telling Dad one night. "Maddie's trying to find herself. She's always been a free spirit." Maddie's phase took an unexpected turn when she started dating Jason, a charismatic but chronically unemployed drummer from a local band. Within 3 months, they were engaged. Within 5, Maddie announced she was pregnant. Rather than expressing concern about the hasty engagement or the challenges of starting a family without financial stability, our parents were ecstatic. A grandchild, Mom exclaimed, already planning an elaborate baby shower. This changes everything. Everything indeed changed, including, apparently, their plans for my education fund. The Berkeley acceptance letter arrived on a rainy Tuesday in March. I'd rushed home from school, checking the mail before even entering the house. When I saw the large envelope with the university's seal, my heart nearly burst. Large envelopes meant acceptance. I'd done it. I'd actually done it. I burst through the front door, waving the unopened envelope. It came. Berkeley's decision came. The living room had been transformed into what looked like a nursery showroom. Mom, Dad, and Maddie were huddled around a laptop, browsing baby furniture. "Open it then," Maddie said, barely glancing up from the screen. "Though I don't know why you're so nervous. Of course they accepted you." With trembling fingers, I tore open the envelope and unfolded the letter. "I got in," I whispered, then louder. "I got in! Full admission to the environmental science program." Mom smiled distractedly. "That's wonderful, honey. Maddie, what do you think about this crib? It converts to a toddler bed later." "Wait," I said, scanning further down the letter. "It says they're offering me a partial merit scholarship, but I still need to confirm my enrollment and submit the housing deposit by April 15th. I looked up at my parents. "Can we talk about the financial details tonight? I need to work out how much we'll need from my college fund to cover the remaining tuition." Dad cleared his throat, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "About that, Olivia. Your mother and I have been meaning to discuss something with you." A cold knot formed in my stomach as I registered the tension in his voice. "With Maddie's baby coming, we've had to reconsider some financial priorities," he continued, avoiding my eyes. "Maddie and Jason need a place to live, somewhere safe and stable for the baby. They can't afford a down payment on their own, and you know how expensive rentals have become." "What are you saying?" I asked, though I already knew. The room seemed to tilt beneath me as 18 years of being overlooked culminated in this final, devastating dismissal. "We've decided to use your college fund to help Maddie and Jason buy a small house," Mom said, as if she were announcing a minor change in dinner plans rather than the destruction of my future. "It's not ideal timing, we know, but family has to come first. A baby changes everything." "What about me?" My voice sounded strange in my ears, hollow and distant. "Aren't I family too?" "Don't be dramatic, Olivia," Dad said, his tone hardening. "You're smart. You'll figure something out. Take out student loans like most kids do. Go to community college for 2 years, then transfer. There are plenty of options." "But you promised," I whispered. "You've been saving for my education since I was born. That money was for my future." "Plans change," Mom said firmly. "Maddie needs our help now. This isn't just about her anymore. It's about our grandchild." I looked at Maddie, hoping for some sign of discomfort or guilt, some acknowledgement of the magnitude of what they were taking from me. She met my gaze briefly before looking away, one hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. "I'm sorry, Liv," she said quietly. "If there was any other way." But there were other ways. They could have helped Maddie and Jason find affordable housing without sacrificing my education.